All right, let's jump right into this explainer and decode what is, honestly, one of the most mind-bending logistical challenges in the financial world right now. We're talking about the transition to IFRS 17. Specifically, we're going to look at the monumental task of applying brand new accounting rules to insurance policies that were sold decades ago. Think about this for a second. How do insurers apply today's rules to policies they sold 20 years ago? It's the ultimate time travel dilemma for companies making this transition. And what's really fascinating is how they're forced to actually solve it. Imagine someone changing the rules of a highly complex game, but then telling you that you have to retroactively apply those new rules to every single move you've made over the last 20 years. That is essentially what the insurance industry is grappling with. To make sense of all this, here's our roadmap. 1. The time travel problem. 2. IFRS 17 as a new reality. 3. The gold standard, FRA. 4. The compromise, MRA. 5. The exit price, FVA. And finally, 6. The bottom line impact. Section 1. The time travel problem. See, insurers couldn't just flip a magic switch on January 1st, 2023. The mandate required them to provide comparative financial statements for the preceding period, meaning they had to measure old, in-force contracts as if these wildly complex new rules had existed right from the very start. It's not just tweaking a few spreadsheet formulas moving forward, it is a complete historical restatement. Moving to Section 2, IFRS 17, a new reality. There is a massive paradigm shift happening here. Under the old standard, IFRS 4, accounting was kind of a patchwork. It relied heavily on historical data and basically recognized profits upfront the moment premiums rolled in. But now, we are completely abandoning that. IFRS 17 forces a strict, standardized model based on current estimates and risk adjustments, recognizing profit only as services are actually delivered over time. It's a huge pivot from a backward-looking historical view to a deeply forward-looking assessment of future risks. And the absolute anchor of this new forward-looking reality is a concept called the contractual service margin, or CSM. You can think of the CSM like a massive liability buffer sitting on the balance sheet that represents unearned profits. Instead of claiming a big gain on day one when a policy is sold, those gains are capitalized into the CSM and then slowly, gradually released into income over the lifetime of the contract. So our core transition challenge here is figuring out how on earth to calculate this exact CSM for policies sold 20 years ago. Section 3. The gold standard, FRA. Okay, the crucial thing to know is that the full retrospective approach, or FRA, is the default expectation. The standard explicitly requires entities to measure each group of contracts as if IFRS 17 had literally always applied. For products with long coverage periods, this demands absolute mountains of historical data, retrospective calculations, and tracking original assumptions from the exact date of inception. For a policy sold back in 2002, you need the data exactly as it was in 2002. As you can imagine, this is often a complete logistical nightmare. And that brings us to a massive practical hurdle: impracticality. The standard actually acknowledges that pulling off the FRA might just be impossible. Drawing from IAS 8, a method is deemed impracticable when an entity simply cannot apply it, even after making every reasonable effort. Maybe the historical effects just aren't determinable anymore. Or, more commonly, doing it retrospectively would require impossible hindsight, basically forcing management to guess what their past selves would have assumed decades ago. So when faced with this impracticality, the path splits. Insurers are thrust into a critical choice between two alternative realities: the Modified Retrospective Approach or the Fair Value Approach. And the standard doesn't actually establish a pecking order between these two. If the FRA is out, you have a free choice, provided, of course, you actually have the right data. Section 4. The compromise, MRA. The MRA is essentially your practical compromise. It acts as a proxy for the retrospective calculation, allowing for very specific, rule-based simplifications. So instead of demanding impossible historical estimates, it lets companies use current estimates combined with actual historical cash flows. The entire goal here is to get as close to the FRA outcome as humanly possible while minimizing the use of hindsight. But catch is, you absolutely must have reasonable and supportable information to back up any of these modifications. Section 5. The exit price, FVA. But what if you don't even have the supportable data for the MRA? What if the data from some legacy portfolio you acquired 20 years ago is just gone? Well, if you lack the data, or if you simply choose to go this route, you pivot to the fair value approach. FVA completely abandons historical restatement.
Instead, it leverages IFRS 13 fair value measurement to ask a totally different question. What is the exit price? Basically, what margin would an average market participant demand to take over this block of business today? The CSM is then just calculated as the difference between this fair value and the fulfillment cash flows at the transition date.
When you compare the two side by side, the conceptual difference is really staggering. The MRA is looking backward, trying to approximate the original profit margin from back when the policy was sold. The FVA, on the other hand, completely ignores the past and looks squarely at the current market exit price. And what's crucial to understand is that the FVA typically results in a much smaller opening CSM at transition. Why? Because it only reflects the margin required by a third party stepping in today, rather than the potentially much larger total profit the company expected when they originally priced and sold the policy all those years ago.
Section 6. The bottom line impact.
Now, setting up this brand new CSM liability on day one doesn't just happen quietly in the background on some spreadsheet. It delivers a profound day one financial hit. Because there was absolutely no equivalent to the CSM under the old IFRS 4 rules, establishing this massive buffer of unearned profits for in-force business directly shrinks a company's opening equity. Essentially, a huge chunk of what used to be considered current equity is stripped out and reclassified as a liability, held back so it can be released as future earnings.
This quote really nails exactly why these transition rules matter so much. The method a company chooses, whether they manage to pull off the FRA, use the simplifications of the MRA, or rely on the market view of the FVA, literally dictates the size of that opening CSM. And because the CSM is the very engine of future profit recognition, this single accounting choice locks in the company's reported profitability and balance sheet position for years and possibly even decades to come.
It really is fascinating. Transitioning to IFRS 17 isn't just some dry, mandatory compliance exercise. It is a critical, high-stakes strategic decision. So it leaves us with a massive question. As the dust settles on this new financial reality, how will these choices between the FRA, MRA, and FVA ultimately reshape the competitive landscape and the valuation of the entire global insurance industry over the next decade? Which time machine would you choose for your legacy business?